rail workers, for the most part, are pretty much kept in the dark until, boom, tentative agreement. We suggest that you ratify it because we don't want the government stepping in, which could make it worse.
Are you on? Which side are you on?
Mark Burrows was I'm not sure if he currently or if he's retired, but he for sure worked for the railroads. He was a member of his union and served his union in various capacities. He's been a member of Railroad Workers United for 14 years, and Railroad Workers United is a cross-craft caucus of railroad workers who are carrying out a struggle within the craft unions for unity, solidarity, and democracy, carrying on a tradition of rank-and-file activity which dates back to the 1890s in the time of Eugene Debs. So we're fans of Eugene Debs here. We're fans of rail workers, and certainly they could use a lot more coordination. That's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. But Mark, welcome to the Valley Labor Report.
Glad to be here. Honored to be here. Appreciate the work you guys do. And
Yes.
for clarity, yes, I have been retired for a few years, liberated from slave wage labor.
There you go. Well, glad to hear it. Congratulations. I only have 30 more years to go. So I am maybe, is it bad that I'm already counting down the years that I've already got?
I wouldn't at that point. I wouldn't start marking them yet.
Yeah,
Wait a
it
bit.
was 31 years.
Right.
It was 31 years last year, but this year it's 30. I can retire when I'm 57. So thanks to my union. So, but
All right,
anyway,
there you go.
Yeah, there you go. So congratulations on your retirement, Mark. Glad to hear it. So I guess let's start we'll start with some background, because we're now talking about rail negotiations again. And for people who are not, who maybe weren't following the rail negotiations super closely in 21 and 22, or have maybe forgotten, maybe they knew it and they forgot, this seems like a pretty quick turnaround, right? The union contracts are typically longer than 2 years. So how is it that you're already gearing up to negotiate a new contract? What's up with that?
So the short version is the Railway Labor Act. So which provides all these mechanisms and hoops and cooling off periods and everything. So by the time Biden and Congress rammed that contract down our throats back at the end of a few years ago, the contract had already been expired for 3 years. So once it went into effect, it had 2 years of shelf life, and so that's why we're right back. The process is, the unions and the carriers will submit what's called Section 6 notices, which is their ultimate wish list. And that begins to play out in November. And then from there, they'll go back and forth. And if they don't come to an agreement, various 30, 60, 90-day cooling off periods, blah, 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 blah. And then still, if there's no agreement, then you could end up with the same scenario that played out last round. Wow.
So just to reiterate for folks, this was a 5-year contract that you finally finished. Well, you didn't finish negotiating. You had it rammed down your throats by Biden
Right.
and Congress 3 years after it was supposed to have taken effect. 3 years after your contract expired the first time.
Yes.
That is Looney Tunes. And so you had 3 years of like backdating. Did you at least get a nice check from the back wages from the raises or not? I'm having trouble remembering that.
That There was some retroactive pay. There years ago that was kind of like you could count on that. Workers could count on that, but now they kind of they move up the implementation date and reduce the retroactive pay and fill in that blank with a signing bonus type thing. But yes, there was a reasonable amount of retroactive pay for the workers who went 3 years without an agreement.
Yeah, that's insane. So remind us then, okay, so just the process of negotiation is wild under the Railway Labor Act. And people, I constantly find, even union folks who are not hip to the way that labor law is divvied up in this country. We've got private sector workers, except for rail and airline workers who, private sector workers, except for those folks under the National Labor Relations Act. You've got rail and airline workers under the Railway Labor Act. You've got federal employees under the Federal Labor Relations Act. And then you've got just a hodgepodge of labor laws for state and municipal workers across the country, because each state and municipality is allowed to set their own labor laws. So it's just a bizarre kind of situation here that we have. But at some point in the conversation, I want to see if y'all have any plans to try to make it so that you do not spend 3 years after contract expiration negotiating another contract. I'm interested in that. But before we go there, can you just remind us of the issues that were at play during this, 3 years that you're negotiating this contract after your previous contract had expired? What were some of the hot button topics at the bargaining table and on the in the trains, as it were?
So I'm going to answer that in two parts. One, the hot button issues at the bargaining table, and then the issues that, in my and Railroad Workers United opinion, were not being discussed. But the main issues at the bargaining table were quality of life issues, scheduling, no paid sick days, the draconian attendance policies, where many workers were working on extra boards, 24 hours. I'm being on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, going to work on 2 hours notice, no scheduled days off. The only days off you'd get were per the FRA mandate. If you worked 6 days straight, you could get 1 day off, and 7 days straight got you 2 days off. And then of course the carriers abused that. People were getting fired for just trying to take off for things like, their daughter's wedding or the kids' baseball game or whatever. And we had an incident on the Burlington Northern where a guy actually died of a heart attack while running the train because he was afraid to lay off and go to the doctor for fear of getting disciplined. Those were the main hot button issues that the union was negotiating. How that was resolved, for the most part, we got a few we got a few paid sick days. We got there was some ridiculous clause where you could have a few days allowed to see a doctor, but you had to give them like a month's notice, and it could only be Tuesday through Thursday. And then the scheduling agreements were left to be negotiated on property, carrier by carrier, and so there have been a range of agreements now with the major class ones. Different, for instance, one agreement is like you work 11 days, you schedule for 11 days, then you get 4 days off, stuff like that. So those were the hot button issues. I would say, I think it's fair to say the worst of those, the roughest edges have been taken off. Rail workers have a little bit more quality of life. Still working 11 days on an extra board, working 11 days straight is still going to lead to fatigue and exhaustion, and which is a safety issue. But there has been an improvement. So so that's how that's been resolved. For my take, safety issues were not part of the discussion, and there's no indication that they will be, such as train lanes. We're running 2-3 mile long trains, which is a major safety issue. And now the FRA has just come out with this 2-person crew mandate, which there's a lot more under the surface. We had always thought that might really come to bear in this next round of negotiations. So that's kind of on hold as this thing gets resolved. So that's kind of where things are at right now.
And so I think, kind of as you alluded to, there were some of the roughest edges were sanded down in the contract itself, and then some more were rounded down as Biden the Biden administration was able to implement some rules and things like this. And another one of those rules that have come down from the Biden administration's Federal Railroad Administration is a new a minimum 2-person crew rule. I think that certainly it's better than not having the rule, but I do think that my understanding is that there are some asterisks there. Could you explain the rule for us, and what are the asterisks?
Okay, there are some big asterisks, major asterisks. It's about, I think, something like 280 pages or something like that. I have not personally gone through it all. But if it's anything, and we're working on it, we're working on formulating, going through it and formulating a response. But if it's anything like anything close to what they had a tentative 2-person crew thing that had been out for public discussion for a few years. If it's anything like that, there are big loopholes, big enough to drive a train through. And at the surface level, it says 2-person crew. Then many of the asterisks, it charts a path for how the carriers can get exemptions. One concern is that so this is kind of like for Class 1 railroads. Your major ones like your BN and CSX, the main six Class 1 railroads. There's a range of Class 2 and Class 3 railroads referred to as short lines, which have basically been spun off. The major railroads sold them off because they weren't making the rate of profit that they wanted to. So they're regional throughout the country, and most of them are owned by big major consortiums, but they get a lot more latitude. They're out of sight, out of mind. They fly under the radar, and some of those are operating engineer only as we speak. And so one of the concerns is that what the carriers could do is do this process of selling off more of their main line, turning it into short lines, which then Class 2 and Class 3 railroads have a lower bar of regulations. So there's plenty of asterisks to be concerned about. We are not popping the champagne bottles at this point in time, and we're basically working on formulating our response to highlight those asterisks.
Right. I think that makes sense, and it's important to be sober-minded about these things. So then, that brings us to these negotiations. Talk to us about, when do they start, and have the rail unions begun member surveys to determine contract negotiation priorities, or anything like that? Or have they come down, the leadership come down with priorities that they're sharing with you at this time? Just talk to us about, where are we with the state of the upcoming negotiations?
So like I said, it really begins in November when the carriers, like I said, it's called a Section 6 notice, and that will get officially submitted, and that will be on their website. We'll have access to it, and then the unions put their Section 6 notice, and like I said, it's kind of like the ultimate, their dream wish list for both parties, and then they go from there. One of the problems is, if you go back to how the UAW negotiated their agreement, think about the transparency. Not only did auto workers know what was being discussed, what was being proposed, what was being counter proposed, but we all knew it. If you were paying, if
right.
we were paying attention, we knew how those discussions and negotiations were going on, which is a major, it's a major testament, a conquest of the United Auto Workers for democracy, who have been able to assert their strength and power within that union. So compared to that, there's like 180-degree lack of transparency from the railroad union leaders, so even after we get the Section 6 notices, after that, rail workers, for the most part, are pretty much kept in the dark until, boom, here's a tentative agreement. We suggest that you ratify it because we don't want a third party, i.e. the government, stepping in, which could make it worse. I'm sure once the Section 6 notices go out, there will be surveys, for input, how meaningful that is, as opposed to how much it is for optics. The proof will be in the final end result. But I hope that answers that question for now.
Yes, I think so.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Well, so what are the, so we're a little ways away, it seems like, from the railroad unions kind of soliciting feedback for contract priorities, or, delivering them themselves. And it sounds like, even to the extent that they are going to be collecting member opinions for that, it's not going to be as transparent as, like you mentioned, that we saw with the UAW. So what priorities is Railroad Workers United tracking that members would like to see addressed in this round of negotiations?
I would say, I'm sure railroad workers want to get more. Like I said, they've been able to put a dent in as you referred to, sanding off the roughest edges, and so I think it's fair to say that that we'd like to see more, to go deeper into a quality of life conquest. As far as Railroad Workers United, we would like to see safety issues, such as these ridiculously long trains, and we would like to see the two-person crew. We would like to see ironclad contractual agreements with no asterisks, with no exceptions, because even this FRA mandate, to whatever extent it may be, some improvement on a certain level, that's only as good as the next administration. We've seen this time and time again. So it looks good right now. The established union leaders have been popping the champagne bottles, and figuratively speaking, I can't say that for a fact, literally, but in their tone and the statements they've put out, it certainly conveys this tone, big celebrating victory for workers. And it's very shallow and surface level, because until it's in contractual black and white, it could be undone by the next it could be rewritten, undone by the next administration, and we've seen this happen before.
Well, and even without it being totally rewritten, my understanding is one of the asterisks in the rule is that there exists the ability for the railroad carriers to request a waiver from the two-person rule. So you could imagine even a Trump administration that doesn't totally scrap the rule, they're just, really willy-nilly with waivers. So yeah, you definitely want something that's more lasting and concrete than, an executive change from an administration, because as you've seen and as we've seen in not only the Federal Railroad Administration, but in the NLRB, in the FTC, in the CFPB, any federal agency, though that, you're going to see pretty radical changes with each administration, and so you don't want to be dependent on that for things as important as safety. What about quality of life issues? I know that those were, those were some of the roughest edges from the last negotiations. Is there, a lot of interest in progressing further on those, getting more time off, things like that?
Yeah, and let me just back up to the waiver thing before I answer this. It's worth pointing out that the Lac Magentic tragedy back in 2013, when the runaway oil train exploded, killing 47 people, leveling the town of Lac Magentic in Quebec, Transport Canada, kind of the equivalent of the Federal Railroad Administration. So the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic was one of these, a short line. It had been spun off from what had once been the Canadian Pacific, and so they were able to request a waiver, and they were running engineer only, and the fact that train was engineer only was a major contributing factor to that tragedy. So I just wanted to say that on how waivers can work and how they can have an impact. So yes, your point is absolutely right. What they could do with that. So yeah, I would say rails want more quality of life, want better scheduling, more regular scheduled days off, more paid days off, more regular scheduling, a lot less of this this extra board 24-hour on call, having more of an idea of when they're going to work and stuff like that. So it's fair to say that they will be trying to extend their gains, the gains that were made, and extend those and make them more meaningful, justifiable pay for the work, how rail workers have to live and exist, and like I said, unfortunately, major safety issues will probably not be a big part of these negotiations. They should be, and they should have been in the last round, so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of union leaders that it seems to me, and even and union members, particularly in the trades, and I couldn't say exactly kind of what the cultural overlap is between the railroad unions and the building trade unions is, but there really does seem to be a culture among those group of unions of almost being proud of your exploitation and not wanting to go after, quality of life types of issues. They will talk about, how much they make, and they'll talk about, that they have health insurance, 100% employer paid and all of this, and they'll be happy about it. Earn while you learn with the apprenticeships, and they'll talk about all of that. But, you talk about their schedule and how much they work, and they turn into and just to be frank about it, they turn into, like the boss. Oh yeah, I work all the time, and we don't want people that aren't willing to work, right? Yeah, it's kind of bizarre to me, as somebody who cares about my free time. I don't want to work all the time. Is that a kind of a similar situation where, among the rail unions, is there that similar kind of attitude of being proud of how much you work and how hard it is, and then kind of almost talking yourself out of wanting more time off?
I would say years ago. I mean, I hired out back in 1974, and that's when I started. And the older heads, they wanted that overtime. So they would be proud if they were making big money. They'd be working 12-hour jobs and proud of it. And the generation today does not want to work like that, does not want to live like that. And what we're seeing is a tremendous turnover. It used to be people would get on the railroad and see it as a career, get your 30 years in. Of course, you can't get a full pension until you need 30 and 60. It used to be 65, but so people would start and see it as a lifelong career. And now younger people just kind of see it as a stopping point, almost like going to working on an oil field for a few years, or working on working in Alaska for a few years, kind of like, okay, here, I'll sacrifice my life and family and everything for a few years, make a few bucks, and then get out and do something. And so there's been a tremendous turnover to the point where some railroads are offering bonus. They've always been, for the last several years, they offer signing bonuses to recruit people, and they get money from the government to hire veterans. They get a bonus there, but now they're actually offering workers, like one of my former coworkers. They get offered thousands of dollars if you can bring somebody in, and they don't want to do it. They don't want to bring their family or friends in, and then you get an older the layer of workers that have been there 15, like this friend of mine puts it, they feel trapped. They can't get out. They've got too much time invested, and so they've got to keep slogging on. So people with 10 to 20 years, they feel trapped, and many younger workers just see it as, I don't need this. I'll go find something else to do. So that would be my answer to that.
So the reason that I wanted to have y'all on is I saw a month, maybe 2 months ago, the RWU begin their calls for coordinated bargaining. And just to reiterate for folks who don't know, there are over a dozen railroad unions. And so you can imagine that there exists the the ability and you know, the attempt oftentimes by the rail carriers to try to whipsaw these different unions against each other to try to get the best deal for the company and try to worsen the deals for the workers. And so RWU, Railroad Workers United, the Inter-Union Cross-Craft Caucus of Rail Workers, they have called for coordinated bargaining. Talk to us about the extent to which rail unions have engaged in coordinated bargaining, what RWU would like to see ideally in these negotiations as far as coordinated bargaining goes, and what moves have we seen in that direction from the unions?
So a brief little history from our founding, from RWU's founding in 2008, this is one of our founding platforms of a united bargaining coalition, and this goes back to Deb's attempts with the American Railway Union, trying to organize all the railroad workers into one union, and at one time, he actually, the majority of railroad workers actually were in the American Railway Union before it was crushed in the aftermath of the Pullman strike. So that's a history lesson for another day. And so we are trying to continue, follow up on that legacy. And over the years, it's always been, once one union settles, then boom, that's it. That sets the precedent, and you can fight it. And if it goes to arbitration or PEB, then the precedent is already set. And especially with the operating crafts, if the engineers or conductors agree to anything involving working agreements, then boom, it becomes, pretty much a rubber stamp. Over the last few rounds of negotiations, you started to get 2 to 3 several unions would be in this coalition, and several unions would be in this coalition, and then so you had maybe 2 or 3 coalitions, and it finally culminated with this last round of negotiations where for the first time we actually had a quote united bargaining coalition, and it functioned that way up until the Presidential Emergency Board recommendations came out, and then boom, right off the bat, a couple of the unions started putting out tentative agreements based on the PEB recommendations. So for all intents and purposes, that was a united bargaining coalition on paper only, and ultimately they resorted to the same methods and divisive tactics that had been happening. So us calling for a united bargaining coalition on a certain point is nothing new, but we are using what happened the last time to make it clear that a united bargaining coalition is not worth that term, the paper that it's written on, without an ironclad agreement, an understanding that says nobody settles until we all settle. Without that understanding and concept, it's a united you can call it a united bargaining coalition, but if you don't have that ironclad, so I think that's the difference in what we're calling for now is so we already did the united bargaining coalition. We need a united bargaining coalition that is a real united bargaining coalition at how it acts and functions, and with the fundamental principle that nobody settles until everybody settles. Only then can it really be a united bargaining coalition.
I think that it doesn't make sense to call it a bargaining coalition unless you have that, because that's kind of the whole thing, like you said. Have the unions been moving in that direction? Have they made any noises that would make you think that that they will be doing that in this round?
We have there's no indicator. Again, with that whole lack of transparency, there really hasn't been a lot of motion and a lot said, and we have no indication to. We don't feel comfortable that without massive pressure from the rank and file, putting that demand forward with major pressure within everyone's respective unions. At this point in time, we have no reason to believe that things would be different than the last time. That's why we're getting out in front and drawing the lessons of what happened last time and appealing to the rank and file workers to put pressure on their respective unions to that how it played out last time, that ain't going to fly. That was just a fake and a fraud. And we need a real united bargaining coalition that actually functions like one.
Mark Burrows, a member of Railroad Workers United for over 12 years, served as co-chair and organizer of the caucus in the past, and the current editor of RWU's quarterly newsletter, The Highball. Mark, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I appreciate it.
And if I could just add, go to our website, railroadworkersunited.org, and get more information about our call for public ownership, and we've launched a new website, Public Rail Now, and also been following the situation in East Palestine, where the residents are calling for pressure on the government to pass the Stafford Act to guarantee health care for people who are screwed over there. And for the best coverage, I'm sure you're covering it, and the Real News Network has been covering it, and so I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. Talk soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. There you go, folks. Railroad Workers United. Find them online. And if you're a rail worker, yeah, absolutely. Tell your leadership you need coordinated bargaining, and you need real coordinated bargaining, not this flim-flam, willy-nilly, we're going to call it whatever we want, but no action behind it.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.